I think it's essential in today's scientific progress. We're at a stage in science where it's clear, scientific research is clearly an international endeavor. It's an endeavor that crosses all disciplines. It means that the more broadly we can distribute information, the more rapidly we will see scientists seeing how they can contribute to a given idea or change it and move things forward. You know, it's really been a revolution in the way that we think about our work, where before your own private little data pool was really essential that you keep a fence around it and you keep it all to yourself and do your small experiment and move forward from there. And now we're seeing that if we make the information broadly accessible, then other investigators who have other expertise, other ideas, other aspirations for what they want to do within a given experiment can see how they can contribute and by working together be able to move forward. All of that's going to require that, or all of this will be enabled by having information as openly accessible as possible. So it really changed the field. Library budgets have been shrinking at all institutions, as far as I know, at a time when information that they could be managing is vastly increasing. So it's not sustainable in that sense. What could replace it is the challenge. And to my thinking, the replacement really is not a hard hill to climb. Institutions and funding agencies, to me, should pay for the cost of publication of scientific information. The publication of scientific information is really a part of the experiment. You know, if we don't publish our work, it is exactly the same as not doing it. So this issue about publishing open access has been swirling around now for years, and we really haven't settled on a working model. And I think that the stakeholder group that you've assembled here in this forum, I think can really take a crucial step in being able to implement some real action. You know, we're at a stage where institutional platform models are being developed that are really exciting, that are separate from what's happening with the commercial publishers. The commercial publishers are sort of waiting to see how the institutions respond, the kinds of open access models and strategies that they choose to use to go forward with, whether there'll be a unified strategy that will emerge from that, to see how they will respond. And so I think that your group really represents an important first set of stakeholders to make the first actions to be able to move forward. So I'm optimistic that this could be really a significant gathering. So it's really important to carry the word back. I mean, you're right that we all go to too many meetings where we sit through sessions, participate in them, speak, and get inspired ourselves and excited about what we're doing, and then we thank everyone and go home and get back to the grind and the things that have been piled up while we were away, and then that's the end of it. So the challenge then is how to translate the activity at this forum into action at the institutions as everybody goes back. I think that you know, as institutional representatives, as librarians, as administrators, I think a important framework is to point out, or to make clear that you understand that the scientific endeavor, not to overstate it, but I think it's not too bad, is kind of at stake here. The ways that we're going to be able to move forward, given the new world of the way that information emerges, really requires that we rethink the way that we're presenting scientific information. And so faced with that challenge, coupled with the economic challenge of paying for of being able to cover the costs of the current models, really mandates that we make some changes, right? So change is hard for everyone, even when it's to our own benefit. And so I think the challenge is convincing all of the stakeholders on returning to our institutions that this is the time to be paying attention to this and be willing to do the hard work of thinking about how we implement change. But I think that could be done. I think what a product of a forum like this can actually germinate that kind of thinking. I hope so.
Right from the start, the value of open access has been that people who are not in institutions like this or in University of California campuses can have access to literature. After all, most of the research that's conducted in this country is paid for by public funds. And yet, people who read something in the newspaper and and who are curious and may have some scientific facility have been unable to gain access to papers that are held behind a firewall without an additional charge. They, after all, paid for the research in the first place. We owe it to them to have access to that. So that is, to me, the fundamental reason why open access needs to extend its influence. And the commercial journals, the commercial publishers recognize this, but they have been fighting a rearguard action at all political levels to try to resist this inevitable force. And I think and I would urge the University of California Digital Library to use its tremendous influence to force this change on the major publishers in biomedical science, Elsevier and Nature Publishing Group. Corporations like Elsevier are avaricious. They have the highest profit margin of any publisher and possibly of any corporation in the world, because they charge authors going in and they charge authors access to their own information. They are avaricious, and for their failure to negotiate a settlement with German universities and research institutes is an example of frankly, the arrogance that they bring to the table. They think they can force the German universities to their knees, and I applaud the Germans and the French and the Swedes who are fighting Nature and Elsevier themselves. I unfortunately don't see this happening at the federal level in the United States, but I surely see it happening here in California. We have tremendous influence. Some years ago, Nature Publishing Group presented a fourfold increase in the subscription price for a bundle of Nature journals to the UC Digital Library. And the head librarian called around all the campuses to try to organize a boycott of Nature. And I was primed and ready to do this because they wanted a fourfold increase in the subscription rate just in the course of the negotiation for the next year. And that was completely unsustainable. The university budget was in a free fall at that time. It simply couldn't be done. And so, of course, there was some quiet negotiation that led to some accommodation that was not publicly revealed. I'm sure that Nature had to bend, and so the university used its influence to good effect then, and I think they can continue to do so. Well, there's power in numbers. Obviously, the Germans have proven this with their effort to negotiate with Elsevier, and Elsevier at first allowed the Germans to continue to have access to their journals, but I gather recently it's just been completely suspended. So this is an example of Elsevier's arrogance. They think they can push a whole country around, and this is just not sustainable. And in general, I would say the subscription model has been unfair to a huge number of institutions that simply can't afford the subscription rates. I'll give you an example that shocked me. When I was a kid growing up, in my high school, public high school in a very working class area, they had a science magazine in the library. I've in recent years had an opportunity to travel around to lots of high schools to give talks to AP students and others, and their libraries can't afford even something as simple as science or nature. This is just not right. We shouldn't be burdening high schools or other non-research institutions with such an expense. It's just not right. I hope a strong will to change through a powerful consortium of institutions. The University of California, we have tremendous influence. This could reverberate across the country if UC Digital Library made a forceful decision to bring Elsevier and Wiley and all these commercial concerns to their knees. Well, you know, there's a simple solution. Just take all the subscription money, tell the journals that you'll no longer be subscribing to anything, and turn that all over to the campuses to pay for open access fees.